All right, welcome back to another episode of Wellness Unplugged. I should probably put my seat a little bit lower. That's why I'm leaning over my microphone. I'm excited for tonight's guest. I'm excited for every guest that I bring on the show, but because this is someone who I consider as a friend, as well as someone who I've coached and mentored, and someone who's local from my city. So it's not very often we get to, at least in the small city of Red Deer, get to have these conversations in public. Dillon's a very unique individual who I've had the pleasure of knowing over the last, I want to say 6 years. I think you had a gym and I had the store, and we were just kind of up the road from each other. we
Yep.
had a couple, yeah, we had businesses just up the road from each other, and so, and both of us have seen those businesses go under. So,
Yep.
but you've got quite a story that I think probably still a lot of people don't know. And I wonder when people meet you, what their first impression might be. Because when I first met you, my first thought was, you go by Coach Wolverine, but my first thought was, man, this guy's like a rhino. Um, big bearded, strapping powerlifter, and looks intimidating, but you've got the heart of an empath, and you really want to create positive change in people's lives. And so, I wanted to bring you on and share your story, so people might get to know a little bit more about you and how you got to where you're at. So, I'm going to open up to you and say, how did you get to being Coach Wolverine here?
Well, first, thank you for having me, John. And actually, the one comment though that you did make before I go into that story. So when I was still in the nightclub industry, when to answer your question on what people thought of me when they first approached me, the number one comment I always got was, "Wow, you're not as much of an asshole as you look." Uh, so that's
uh,
that's the people's that's what the first impression normally is. Um,
so
yeah,
so you have like resting, intimidating face or something like that.
yeah. I constantly look like I'm angry at the world and walking through when the reality is my eyes just aren't that great and I don't like wearing my glasses, so I'm always frowning. And it's really sensitive to the eyes, or the sun is really sensitive to
Yeah,
my
yeah,
baby blue eyes.
yeah. So you,
um,
yeah, you've been on quite a journey, and there's definitely been some bumps in the road for you. So what? Why don't we? In fact, why don't we take it right back to kind of early on? Maybe we can go back to some of the teen years, because I know you had this will all play into how you got to where you're at right now. So we'll take it back to teenage Dillon and some of the things that you encountered, and where that sort of dark road that it took you down, and how you got out of that.
Okay, so back to my teen years, I had led a life of feeling like I had to earn acceptance from people. So I essentially tried to make myself as useful as possible to gain attention from people because my self worth was non existent. I never had a problem attracting people into my life. Like it was very easy for me to make friends, but the friends would come and then they would go just as quick.
Yeah.
Uh, so my teen years were definitely, well, at the time it was my lowest point. I did flirt with those suicidal thoughts, unfortunately. The roughest point was right around the 16 years old.
Yeah.
The few years leading up to that is I really started noticing how my parents really didn't get along and they did not know how to communicate. Unfortunately, my father had a drinking issue. And by the time I hit the age of 16, my parents had split.
Yeah.
We weren't exactly financially well off, so I ended up taking it upon myself to go and work as much as I could, which equated to about 25 to 30 hours a week at Walmart. So I didn't have to ask my mother for money to do anything. Uh,
Hmm.
and then I did this on top of still going to school full
Yeah.
time. I graduated and then playing on two different volleyball teams. It was also this same time where I was involved in the weights already. And being that I was in a depression, I essentially had stopped eating. So it was my most drastic weight loss from when I was considered obese. I went from 250 pounds at a rocking 5 foot 8 inches tall when I was 14 to hitting 16 years old down to 190 pounds.
Yeah.
And to see pictures of myself back then, I didn't even recognize myself because that was too small for my frame. So I continued to work, make some money, pay for my own things. As I said, my father had left. He had his own things that he had to work on. I hold no ill will against either of my parents. They both did a
Yeah.
phenomenal job in the parenting aspects.
Yeah.
But throughout the time of high school and going through all of this is also when I really learned that the people that I had come into my life were they were just there for a season. Uh, they were in and out as quick as possible. Even to this day, I actually don't have many friends from high school still. And it was an eye-opening experience. It was one of the first large trials that I had to go through in my life, uh, going down, dragging myself through that sewage, again, flirting with those suicidal thoughts, and pulling myself through to be able to, well, get to where I am today.
Yeah. So you talk about it, and I think there might be a tendency for sometimes people to hear that phrase, flirting with suicidal thoughts, maybe not take that seriously. But I think that any time that those words come out of someone's mouth, that they are words that should be taken seriously, because um, we're not in a good place when that's where a mind is going. And I think for most people, it's a cry for help and maybe a sense of hopelessness, or feeling like there isn't a better option. And if you care to share, where was it for you?
Um, it was it wasn't good, honestly, with how I felt lost, alone, and it is surreal. I felt like I wasn't. I felt like I was kind of born in the wrong time era. I felt like I didn't belong with the people that I knew. I felt that things just didn't make sense. I led a life of being friendly to people, and I never understood why I had so many people whom I treated nicely not treat me very nicely back. And so I find myself stuck in this hole, with a lot of these thoughts. And one of the only things that actually pulled me through at that time, it wasn't even fitness. That's a completely different. It was actually music at that time, where I would bury myself in my bedroom and I would play my guitar, for hours until my fingertips would bleed.
Yeah.
At that time, just to frame the current state of mind that I was in, I actually used the gym for self-harm. I used to train to the point where I couldn't use that body part anymore. I would train my legs until I literally couldn't walk, my arms until I couldn't use them. And so definitely not something I recommend, of course.
Yeah.
I used it to harm myself because I hated myself at the time.
And that's some really, really strong language to use, and I can enter into that feeling. I was at a different stage in life, a different phase in life, in my early to mid 30s, when I was really grappling with hating my body that I felt had kind of betrayed me. But it's quite interesting to think that going to the gym, instead of being a positive thing, was actually something you were using to harm yourself. And I think I'm grateful that it happened when you were relatively young, when your body could actually sort of handle that kind of punishment, and bounce back from it. I definitely wouldn't
Hmm.
recommend that as a style of training. But what's kind of interesting is that you mentioned that, um, this, despite looking like this intimidating jerk, you're anything but, and it doesn't take very long for people spending time in your presence to feel kind of warm. If I could say it, like safe, just really comfortable and at ease, because you have this knack for setting people at ease. And you spent a number of years in the nightclub industry, and I imagine you have quite a few stories from there. But what is it that got you into that industry, and what did that sort of teach you about people?
I have stories that your imagination can't even fathom about those places. So I got into the nightlife industry actually because I had just started my business, owning a gym with one of my best friends, and he's still fortunately one of my best friends today, Kyle. And so for the first couple of years, we decided to not take a wage from the gym. So I had started working two part-time jobs One was the nightclubs, and the other one was selling fitness equipment and supplements. And so I was just doing security on the weekends. So I basically continued doing security until the unfortunate day came that we had to close our business. And then I just transitioned there to full time. After a few weeks, I was offered the supervisory role for the security. I took it. A few months after that, I was offered the supervisory role for security for both nightclubs and the hotel. So I took it. And then I rolled in that position till I got promoted to managing one of the bars outright, and then was there until lovely current world events.
Yeah. So you got involved in security, and I think some people would take a look at and go, well, the only reason that you're here is because you're a big and intimidating looking guy. But I think there's more to security than that. I think you end up having some really interesting interactions with people, and you learn a lot about humans and how they behave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the intimidating part of the security, I had damn near had an anxiety attack every single night I drove to work. Like by the time I got to work, it looked like I had peed in my armpit. That is how much I sweat every single night. And so I had to actually make myself fit those security shoes. But yeah, to touch on some of the people that I've met and the lessons that I learned, it was probably about 2.5 years into working there where I started witnessing some things, but receiving them in a different way, where my perspective actually started to change. And there was one incident in particular, actually, that this had happened with, where he had come into the club, and right off the bat, he started causing trouble. So after he got to the point where it was like, okay, you got to go, I got my security to take him outside. Now, as we were taking him outside, he decided to punch and kick people all the way out and ended up assaulting a decent amount of people on the way. It was after the fact that we found out that this dude was also a Golden Gloves boxer. So hence why he was very good at what he was doing that we didn't want him to do.
Yeah.
It was about 15 minutes later, I got a call that he had snuck into the bar adjacent to the one that I was currently in. And the exact same thing happened. So this time it got too far. And unfortunately, I had to call the police to get him taken away, at least to the drunk tank. So I had my doorman just kind of surround him outside. He was at this time now laying on the ground, and my doorman didn't even have their hands on him. I called the cops. This guy starts so he starts hitting his head off the ground to make it look like the doorman beat him up.
Yeah.
And later,
It's already tough enough to be seeing stuff like this.
So later, the next week, I found out that I had a mutual friend with this guy, and he had asked about the night in the situation.
Yeah.
So I filled him in, and then he's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so I asked him, I'm like, I feel like something else had happened. What are you not telling me? And that's when he proceeded to tell me that a week prior to the date of the incident, he walked in on his mother hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that nobody should ever see. And it and it just speaks to, first of all, your testament of your character, just in terms of that, you're telling a story from a couple of years ago, and that you're still feeling very real in terms of the emotions around that experience. And it's probably why you find yourself doing what you do, because an experience like that left such an intense mark that there's almost always more than meets the eye.
Very much so. And that was the pinnacle moment in my life where we have zero idea on what demons anybody else is facing. And so we
Yeah.
have zero right to judge anyone else or even compare our story to theirs.
And I would think in the especially in the nightclub industry, they paint this I suppose this image of people going there to have a good time. And it's not to suggest that that's not some of what happens there, but I wonder if there's a lot of people that go there to escape, to try and forget, to drown it out, whether it's in alcohol and noise or both.
Well, in my time there, especially after this event happened, and I started becoming more aware of how the human mind works. And the unfortunate thing is the 80-20 rule, I feel actually applies to this, where it's actually only about 20% of people that go to the clubs are actually there to have fun.
Yeah.
The amount of people that I seen come in there after the 5 years of being in there, daily, daily drinking throughout the
Yeah.
week, every single week over 5 years. They're not even the same people. People, like these were our customers, but at the same time, these customers, when they're regulars like that, you get to know them. You get to know them on a personal
Yeah.
level, and it was very heartbreaking to see either the ones that or their significant others coming out, cheating on them, making poor decisions of
Yeah.
trying different, drugs or whatever the case might be. And it was sad. Like I can't even count how many times I've held grown men in my arms at the end of the night with them in tears because I was simply an ear to listen.
Yeah. And that speaks volumes. And I think at that point in time, you're realizing that you know there's more to what you need to be doing in life than just keeping people safe at a nightclub.
Yep.
Although I would say, ironically, it might be a good place to find some clients as you see people as you see people struggling. Although it might not be the right time to broach those conversations. Um, but
Yeah.
but you see a lot. You see people struggling with these things, and this is where they go to escape the reality of their life. Um, did that turn you off of drinking, partying, anything like that, or maybe this is never something you never really did a lot of to begin with?
uh Yes. Yes, it did. The switch was already off, but it just kind of solidified the lock on that switch because I actually had a problem with alcohol during those teen years as well. There was a handful of times that I went to school drunk. Nobody knew. No one knew that I had a problem with drinking, and it wasn't that I drank all the time. It was that when I drank, it was for the wrong reasons because it was just
Yeah,
the easiest way to numb the feelings that I was currently feeling. And so, yeah, going to high school drunk, don't recommend it. uh, and
yeah,
so basically, I had just made the decision to stopped drinking around the age of 20, and I had quit drinking cold turkey for about 2.5, almost 3 years, because of that thought of I needed to have a drink, so I just took the option away. It was a non-negotiable, and after I no longer had that thought, I then started just slowly introducing it of like, okay, I'll have, tonight I'll have a vodka water while
hmm
going out with friends. And fortunately, ever since then, I've never had an issue with it since. It's because I don't allow it to be an option for myself to have an issue with it.
yeah. And I think very often when I speak with clients, I use this phrase: "Don't run on a sprained ankle." Um, when something's really a problem and you're not in a healthy state, when your brain isn't in a healthy state, it's not enough to say I'm going to try and just sort of just use it from time to time. Sometimes you have to set a firm, solid, definite boundary that says I am making a decision. I am not going to consume this. And in my own journey, in terms of my struggle with food addiction and binge eating, there were times where I had to do that, and I had to go to my wife and say, like, we can't bring this food into the house for this period of time. Um, and it was,
Hmm.
it was about creating space to heal. And now those things that used to be trigger foods for me, they're not really an issue, which is amazing. I love it.
Hmm.
But it's that whole don't run on a sprained ankle. Give it, give yourself the space to heal if you need it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so you started feeling the like you want to do more,
Hmm.
and you want to help people in a different way, because I think what you were witnessing, especially in the nightclubs, is a lot of people in crisis of confidence.
Yeah.
They're using alcohol to mask their fears, their insecurities, to try to lower their inhibitions, to try to become that confident person that they feel like they should be, but can't seem to be without
Yep.
alcohol.
Yep.
And so you said, I know what, we need to help some people out here and help them cultivate genuine confidence. But I really believe that we can't do this work in other people until we've done the work ourselves.
I agree 100%.
And you've done a ton of work to get to where you're at. I know that because I've been on the sidelines, kind of watching a lot of this happen. I know I've mentored you, but I'm also, I think, one of your biggest fans and supporters as well, because I think I see like uh, what tremendous potential, and the fact that you've already touched a number of people's lives through your coaching, and in a really powerful way. And I think you're really just beginning, which is kind of exciting to think about.
Oh, thank you, John. I appreciate your kind words.
And so, if we start thinking about, we'll shift gears a bit, because now we know a bit of the backstory. Now you decide you want to help people cultivate confidence. How did you start to develop that within yourself?
um, to develop confidence within myself, it was kind of just actually it started off with it's just I had to do this. It was a non-negotiable. It's my journey in finding confidence actually started in the nightclubs,
Yeah,
because it started with me going to work every single night, almost hyperventilating, panic attack, and to the point where I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this like this. So I had to reframe how I thought about what work was. Instead of going to work fearing that I might get into a fight, I had to reframe going to work to just have fun and try and witness people have fun. And so that was actually the stepping was that I couldn't be a scared security guard. I especially couldn't be a scared management of security for two
yeah,
nightclubs.
yeah,
So that basically it was a non-negotiable for me. It's like, okay, I got to take step into this. And through very many trials and errors of like, whoops, that didn't work. Let's try it this way. I
yeah,
just slowly pieced together the puzzle of what I needed to be, or what I needed to explore in myself and figure out the why behind it as to why I was insecure in those areas,
yeah.
and move from there with confidence.
And we got another comment from Kevin here. Thank you so much, Kevin, and really awesome to have you joining the live stream as well. Appreciate you participating in there. And I wonder if part of it was, despite your intimidating appearance and your ability to handle yourself physically if push comes to shove, which is actually a literal a literal
Quite
metaphor,
literal.
quite literal in the case of being a nightclub bouncer, security guard, and so on. At the core of your being, you don't actually want to be that. You don't want to be put in a
No.
situation where you have to be in a physical altercation with somebody. It's like, an absolute last resort for you.
Yeah.
And knowing that, I think that's one of the reasons why it would have been difficult, especially in the beginning, to show up. But I think what that might have also forced you to do was really develop you already had the raw skills, I think. But this
Hmm.
really forced you to begin to polish how you interact with people, because now you're interacting in a really high stakes situation. You're interacting with people whose inhibitions have been altered by the consumption of alcohol, meaning they're going to be more emotional, less logical, and less rational. And so you've got
Yep.
to be the level-headed one in this situation. And so it's like reality on steroids a little bit. You're not dealing with rational people. So when you sort of battle test your skills in that area, your skills in navigating, handling, coaching, and guiding people, it makes
Hmm.
people that are sober probably seem like they're they're a little easier to handle and work with.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, it was the biggest out of all of that and dealing with people in the security aspect. Once I started having those self-reflection and perspective shifts in myself, I realized a lot of the things that people project, most things that people project are the insecurities that they see within themselves. And they'll project it onto whoever they can to make the other person feel vulnerable in hopes that it's going to make them feel better, which never actually works
Yeah.
because we've all been there where we've woken up the next day and be like, I said what to who and what happened, right?
Yeah.
It's like I've seen that, and it was I learned that if I handled the situations properly, 9 times out of 10, if it was a customer, even a semi-regular customer, they would come back and they would actually apologize for how they acted.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
it was just simply, you know, what it boiled down to in almost every single situation were people acting out because they didn't feel validated.
Yeah. That's so interesting to hear it that way.
Yeah, and even in the self-respect reflection back to all that stuff, it's just like, wow. Because every time that I almost did a flawless defizzle of a fight, it was simply me taking the instigator, putting my arm around him, and be like, come over here with me, buddy. Let's go talk. Come on, let's go away from everyone else. Let's just go talk. I'm here to listen. And then it would just be like verbal regurgitation
Yeah.
of what's going on in their life. And
Yeah.
I would hear life stories that I'm like, I don't know if you should be telling that to a stranger, but I appreciate that you feel comfortable with me to do that. But yeah, that lack of validation,
Yeah.
it's makes a person feel really vulnerable, especially when you mix it with 10, 12 beers, drinks, shots,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and loud music,
It's
sticky
a very,
lights.
yeah, it's a very emotionally, in one sense, emotionally triggering situation to put yourself into. Like it's a very intense experience.
Yep.
Um, and it's funny because in my business that I previously had, I used to call myself a bartender without alcohol. And so I ran, for those who are watching who don't know, I used to run a nutrition and supplement store, and people would come in and they're basically looking for a supplement to solve their problems in a nutshell.
Yep.
And I would have to explain to them that supplement's not going to do that. And we get into sort of unpacking their life story, and that's kind of how I found my way into coaching. And so I see some parallels here. In a sense, you weren't a bartender, but you were involved in helping people who are using alcohol to navigate their challenges. Now,
Yep.
you had a couple of things that we didn't touch on in your backstory here, a couple of really tough experiences you had to go through, but I think they also were growth experiences. And one of those being and why I want to mention this is because I think for people who are going through a hard experience right now, there's an element of hope here because it's like these experiences that are really, really difficult to go through in that moment. When you look back, you realize that, what, I am where I am today because I was basically forced to go through that experience and forced to grow in that very uncomfortable situation. But that's why I'm here today. And so for
Mhm.
one of those, you were engaged to someone, and that relationship failed, and it was not because, well, I don't know all the details, but we'll just say like it wasn't, you were committed to that relationship.
I was committed to that relationship, and unfortunately, it was at a time in my life where I bit off more than I could chew. It was the exact same time that I was trying to build the business while also
Mm-hmm.
holding down 2 jobs so I could afford to pay for the needs of my family. And she had discovered some stuff in herself that she wanted to start exploring, and unfortunately the parallel paths that we did have just kind of coasted off to the side and fizzled out. It was a very quick fallout, which the actual fallout of the relationship wasn't the worst part. It was bad, but it was after that had happened, it was something that I did not think would ever happen because this well, this was the woman of my dreams. I was clearly engaged to her, and
Mm-hmm.
she decided to leave after I had pleaded to go to couples counseling or any of that kind of stuff. And the day that she left, I had actually called into work and checked myself into the hospital because it was um, I basically felt suicidal. And
Yeah.
it was actually at this time where my best friend Kyle and also business partner had actually came to see me in the hospital, A, to ensure that I actually went to the hospital, and B, to be there for moral support. And honestly, if in that moment, if it wasn't for him, there's a chance that I might not actually be here today.
Yeah.
But it was the time after that of going from one income or two incomes down to a single income to pay for the mortgage on a house that I had just purchased just a couple number of months ago or prior to that date. So my bills essentially covered, sorry, my income covered the bills on my house. I could not afford to eat. So I had to ration the food that was in my pantry. There were days where I only ate a can of tuna because that's all I could. There was, my mother at the time wasn't exactly well off, but she did help where she could, and I am eternally grateful to her. She's
Yeah.
my mother.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was what was left in my pantry, and I ended up resorting to having to steal food from work. I worked in a hotel. I knew where the kitchen was, and I knew where the food was that they wouldn't know would go missing. I'm not proud of it, but I had to do what I had to do. And it was through that time where I had the lovely pleasure of dealing with three of life's biggest teachers: a broken heart, an empty stomach, and an empty wallet,
Yeah.
all at the same time.
Yeah. But yet, I would say that in that experience, you did what you had to, and it's not that we're advocating for stealing, but it's like sometimes we don't understand, or we don't, someone would maybe just hear that you took some food from a hotel. Now, if we were to witness the amount of food that goes to waste in restaurants,
It's horrible.
yeah,
It's horrible.
and really, you were doing it because there wasn't really another way, or you didn't at that point you didn't see another way, and it was what you had to do to kind of make things meet. And
Yeah,
but you were able to pull yourself out of that.
I was. I was. And I was definitely a stronger person for it. This was also right around the time that I had discovered my love for powerlifting. And it was also the first competition I was prepping for. This all happened. So
Yeah,
I basically, yeah, the food that I had to take was basically the most calorie dense stuff that I could, so I can still maintain my prep for the competition. But I learned
just eating
how
sticks
resilient
of
I could
butter.
be. Pizza and bacon. Pizza and bacon. A lot of pizza and bacon.
Yeah. Now, so we're gonna wrap up here shortly, but I just kind of one more question. I wanted to explore the powerlifting aspect of what you were doing. I know through your younger years you did experience some bullying. Was there any aspect of going into powerlifting sort of driven by that? Wanting to be big and strong, so that in a sense that you couldn't be picked on again.
Yes, but there's two sides to that actually. Uh, so growing up, I had struggled with weight and was teased for it, as
Yeah.
it's already been mentioned. And powerlifting, I thought was really cool for two reasons. The first reason, the first competition I ever witnessed, the camaraderie in the strength sports was phenomenal. It didn't matter if you were competing against somebody directly, they were on the sideline cheering for you. Everyone just wanted to see you succeed.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen that in most sports. It was most sports I was involved in, like I played volleyball, I used to box. It was all very cutthroat.
Yeah.
And then when I witnessed that in powerlifting, I'm like, wow, this is cool. And then I had a very poor relationship with food still. Even though I
Yeah.
had lost the weight, I had gotten in better shape, I still had a poor relationship with food. So getting into strength sports was just an excuse to out train my diet to get as big and strong as possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, it worked until I realized that I had divulged in the sport of powerlifting not only for my love of the sport, it's there, but it was because I felt like I needed to belong to something.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And I think that's actually quite a good I want to say appraisal of powerlifting as a sport. I never got into it competitively, but I asked that question because there was a part of me, like I was in my disordered relationship with food. I was attempting to outlift and outtrain my disordered relationship with food, and
Mhm.
I can say it doesn't work.
No,
It's a lot easier to eat 5,000 calories than it is to burn it.
it absolutely is.
Well, Dillon, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate your willingness to be open, to be vulnerable, to sharing your story because it really is a powerful one, and I think it's an extra special story because very rarely do I actually know the person that I'm interviewing in person and get to live in the same city as them. So I've really appreciated and enjoyed this conversation and your willingness to share. If people want to get in touch with you, they feel, hey, you know what, I'd like to talk more to Dillon because it seems like he might actually get me, because I think that's one of the powerful things that coaching can present is, what, here's not only someone who's qualified, because you are a certified life coach, but the piece of paper with your name on it isn't what really makes you an exceptional coach. It's everything that you've lived and overcome that allow you to intimately understand the struggles people might be facing. So how do they reach out to you?
Well, they can send me an email direct at coach@thewolverinelifestyle.com, or they can follow my Instagram at coach.wolverine and send me a message through there. Or they can visit my website at thewolverinelifestyle.com. I do have links to all of my social media feeds where I can be reached at up in the top left corner of my website. And even if you just want to chat and just say hello, right? I promise
Yeah.
I'm not going to try and sell you in anything.
Yeah. You know what? I love this. You're pilot on the journey to find your why and leave the victim mentality behind. And I think you've done exactly that. And people can click the book more, and that'll take them to finding a time to hop on a call with you. I think it's really powerful. I'm really glad that you put that out there as an offer as well. So, last parting thoughts. What would you, if you were to just impart one piece of advice or just one thought based on your story that you've shared? How would you sort of tie it up in a neat little bow here?
Well, basically, always keep in mind that the only thing in life that matters is what you think about yourself when you're by yourself, because every single other choice, decision, route that you take in life is going to stem from that belief and that belief alone.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thanks very much, Dillon, and thank you for tuning in. I appreciate everyone that did tune in and participate in the live broadcast. And once again, I really highly recommend you reach out and get in touch with Dillon. You won't regret having a conversation with him, and you just might leave that conversation with an entirely different perspective on life. And so this is Coach John signing off with Dillon here, and we'll catch you on Friday for the next broadcast.
Thank you for having me, John.